Hello, and thank you so much for joining us today for Thursdays with AARP Wisconsin. Today, or actually this whole month, we are celebrating Pride Month. So I'm very excited for our guest speaker today. But before we get to him, there's a couple announcements that I always like to make, is we have a lot of virtual offerings coming up for AARP Wisconsin, which you can find on our website below, which is aarp.org/WI. If you click on there, you'll see upcoming information and also resources and blogs, enough to keep you busy for an entire week. So we definitely encourage you to visit our website. Next, I would also like to remind you of AARP Community Connections. If you click on this website, you'll find resources on health, personal money management, recipes, exercise, and then also AARP Friendly Voice program. This was launched a few months back, and you can actually put a request in for one of our trained volunteers to call you and just check on you, just to see how you're doing. It's a friendly voice. You could put a request in weekly, daily, for whenever you need it, but AARP is here with you every step of the way. So please make sure you click on the website below in your Google browser. So I would love to now introduce you to our guest speaker today. Hi, Beau. How are you today?
Hi, good morning, Amber. I'm well. How are
Good
you?
morning. Good, good. So before we get started, I would love to just read your bio. It's very impressive. So Beau currently serves as an advisor with AARP's Office of Community Engagement, where he partners with 10 states in the West region. So we woke him up a little bit early today to develop and implement local engagement strategies. He also helps support AARP's national LGBTQ outreach and engagement. He has been with AARP for 9 years, and he lives and works in Golden, Colorado. That's a lot. And I'm jealous that you live in Colorado. You get to see all those beautiful mountains.
Well, I love it here, but I also have a very soft spot in my heart for Wisconsin. So,
Oh, thank you. Yes, it's beautiful here too. But anytime somebody comes here, they're like, "There's no mountains. It's all flat." And I'm like, "Well, what you gonna do?" So, Beau, we're really excited to have you here. AARP is celebrating Pride Month, which is to highlight the LGBT community, and you are such an asset to AARP and have a wealth of knowledge of the resources that we can offer the community. So that is what we are here to chat about today. And let me just get this up real quick. Sorry. Um, so you've been with AARP, of course, for 9 years, as I stated. So, AARP is often known as being like a wise friend and a fierce defender of people. So how has AARP shown up for the LGBT population?
great question. We as an organization have been around for 60 years. We celebrated our 60th anniversary last year.
Mhm.
And, I would say during the more recent years, in the last 10 years or so, we've really made some concerted efforts to um, provide some relevant programming and advocacy and outreach to older LGBT adults as part of our broader kind of social mission for the
Mhm.
organization. So when it comes to sort of the being a wise friend, I like to think about that from the perspective of the kind of awareness and outreach and education that we do in the
Mhm.
community. And so, one of the things that I think is impressive that ARP's been doing for a very long time is just having some actual representation from the
Correct.
LGBT community within our own media channels. So we have publications like AARP the magazine, which is the
Mhm.
largest circulation magazine in the world, and we've had folks like Melissa Etheridge and George Takai and others on cover stories, and just kind of helping people understand that older LGBT adults exist, and they have some specific needs. So that's one thing that I think is really important. On a more sort of kind of some of the fun stuff that we do, because we talk a lot about here at AARP this idea of fun with purpose.
Mhm.
So we know we work on really important issues, but we also like to have fun. And so one of the things that I really like about our outreach to the LGBT community is movie screenings. We've, for many years, through our Movies for Grown-Ups screening program, we'll often host screenings that are catered to the LGBT community. Last year, we had an excellent showing with the screenings of Rocket Man, the movie
Mhm.
about Elton John. We ended up having more than 9,000 people come to those free
Wow.
screenings. We were in 37 different states, I think 78 different communities. So that was a really great way for us to get out across the country, show our support for the community, and also offer something fun and interesting for them. I think some of the more innovative ways that we've been a wise friend for the LGBT community come from our state offices. We've
Mhm.
had lots of fun and interesting events that state offices have partnered on and led. We have things like oral history projects. Our friends in North Dakota have done an excellent job with kind of capturing these oral histories of older LGBT adults who live in the Fargo area, which maybe isn't an area that you might think
Mhm.
of when you're thinking about LGBT community. We have or other states who've done partnered with an organization called SAGE, which stands for Services and Advocacy for LGBT Elders. And they've done what they call a SAGE table, which is really just a community conversation where you bring folks together, you break bread together, you discuss the issues of the day over a meal, and it's a really great conversation piece. We've traditionally shown up at Pride festivals across the country. That's obviously a little bit different this year in the
Mhm.
wake of COVID. And on the more serious side of it, we do offer workshops around caregiving and fraud. We have some of our kind of signature programs like driver safety and tax aid that sometimes house their programs and services within LGBT community centers. And so I think those are just some of the examples of kind of how we do some of the outreach. And then on the advocacy front, we this is a newer area for us, to be completely honest.
Mhm.
I would say within the last 3 or 4 years, we've been more proactive in taking advocacy stances for our LGBT members. It might surprise folks to know that we have almost 1 million members who identify as LGBT, which
Wow.
actually makes us one of the largest membership organizations representing LGBT folks. So that's kind of a
Wow.
surprising statistic
Yeah.
for some folks. But I did want to, on the sort of, you mentioned the sort of fierce defender role, which
Mhm.
is often where we play an advocacy role. And I was really excited as someone who identifies as gay myself to hear the Supreme Court's recent ruling this month. It was a great way to celebrate Pride for us because it really provides basic protections to LGBT workers who previously didn't have any protection at the federal level. So, what
Mhm.
that meant was I could be fired just based on my sexual orientation or gender identity. And so the Supreme Court ruling that came out this week was really instrumental in that. And both AARP and our foundation signed on to an amicus brief to support that legislation. So we were
Great.
thrilled to be able to do that. And it's really such an important piece of legislation that will protect many older LGBT workers.
Mhm.
We know older workers in general have a lot of hurdles to overcome, and this will at least remove one of those barriers for our older LGBT workers.
Absolutely. No, I think it's important information that AARP is trying to get out to our members. If you have a question for Beau, you can post it below. We'll be taking questions at the end. And once again, I'm here with Beau Ballinger, who is with AARP out of our Colorado area, but he is here to talk all about AARP resources and information regarding the LGBT community. And we're excited, of course, to celebrate Pride Month. So, kind of back to what you're saying. So, it does sound like AARP has a history of reaching out to the LGBTQ, like older adults. So, why is this such an important audience to AARP?
Well, first and foremost, I would go back to what our founder, Dr. Ethel Percy Andrus, said, which is what we do for all.
Mm-hmm.
And we take that to heart at AARP. And that means that, we're showing up for people 50 and older no matter what. And so I think that's an important sort of foundation for our organization and how we show up for different types of communities. We believe in dignity and value and worth of all human lives. So it's just very natural for us to be, working with LGBT older adults and helping to support them. As I mentioned, we have 900,000 of our members self-identify as LGBT, so that's a substantial amount of people. That's
Correct.
a lot more people than live in my home state of Wyoming. So we're talking about a good amount of people, and these are just the folks who have self-identified. That it certainly could be more. But one of the things I wanted to mention as sort of why we work with older LGBT adults. A lot of what we have learned comes out of a 2008 study that AARP's multicultural leadership team developed. And it really was a landmark study because there just weren't a lot of statistics on older LGBT adults. And so some of the things that we learned from that study, which is it's actually called Maintaining Dignity is the title of the study. And it's available on that aarp.org/pride site that you can see on your screen. But one of the things that I wanted to just highlight is that a lot of older LGBT adults worry about not having the adequate family and social support that they might need as they
Mhm.
age. There are more and more LGBT adults that have children and grandchildren, but as you can see on the screen, there 76% worry about having that social support. So that means that issues like social isolation and some of those other issues will start to rear their head as we age. The other thing that I think is really interesting that you can see on this slide is that for the most part, we've discovered that older LGBT adults live in all sorts of communities. They're in cities, towns, suburbs, rural areas. But when it actually comes to being able to have access to services, general LGBT services, and more specifically LGBT senior services, there really is a gap in our rural areas, in our suburbs, in our towns, and even in our urban and big cities. So we thought that was really interesting, and that's one of the reasons why we are working in this space. On the next slide, I just wanted to highlight something here as well. There are a number of fears and concerns that older LGBT adults have when it comes to having fair access to things like affordable housing, to health care, to long-term care. And, these are the types of issues that unfortunately are being felt even more strongly today in the wake of COVID-19. So part of our research showed that I think it was 57% of older LGBT adults find that their healthcare providers are insensitive. And that might just mean something like something muttered under their breath, or a strange look at the doctor's office, or something as egregious as misgendering a person.
Mhm.
So, there are some real issues out there. And this research was the first time that we were able to identify what some of these issues are so that we can find ways to help support older LGBT adults in this area.
Wow. No, and some of the statistics are very heart-wrenching, and I appreciate what you're doing, Beau, and also what AARP is doing for the LGBT community. So we are going to take a question. I see a question from Jim. We'll just bring that up. So Jim, AARP has had great presence at in-person events to support the LGBT community. How can they or AARP do a better job reaching out to this community during the pandemic?
Jim, that's a great question. As you can imagine, or as you might know, this has been a real challenge for us as an organization that serves a demographic that the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says is at higher risk for transmission and severe illness from the virus, or death, unfortunately, as we know. So as an organization, we've actually had to make a lot of changes. Amber, I know you're aware of this, and others in our state offices,
Correct.
because we're actually not able to go out and support any kind of in-person events like we traditionally do. And that's one of the going back to our founder, Dr. Andrus. She said, she had another quote that's one of my favorites, which is, we can be most effective in our communities. And that's really hard for us to do when we can't show up physically in our communities during this pandemic. So some of the things that we've seen as it relates to Pride is we're relying a lot on social media. We're relying a lot on our state offices thinking creatively about how they might engage virtually. So I'll use an example out of Oregon. I work with that team there pretty closely, and they're partnering with their local Sage affiliate and some other local partners to host a virtual Pride gathering. We have no idea, if it's going to be well attended or if people are going to want to participate in that experience, but it's just our way of sort of reaching out and attempting to help folks connect. I'll talk a little bit more in a bit about a global Pride event that we're also supporting, and we'll tell folks how they can access and join in on that as well.
Beautiful. So before we get to our next question, so I know you talked about some of the resources. So if you could give specific examples of some of the resources AARP offers to the LGBT community.
Sure. Yes, I'd be happy to. So a couple of the things I wanted to highlight have to do with our caregiving work and our age-friendly or livable communities work. These are two issue areas that are really important to AARP in general, and we've made some concerted efforts to really customize these so that they're culturally relevant for the LGBT community. So when it comes to caregiving, we have a great resource, not only for the LGBT community, but for many other multicultural communities on our website at aarp.org/prepare to care. And this caregiving guide offers a number of resources for folks who are either entering the caregiving role for the first time or have been in it for a while and just need some tips and resources, because we all know being a caregiver is an incredibly difficult job. It's one that you don't get paid for. It's sometimes a thankless job, but it's an incredibly important one. And so what you'll see in the resource, the LGBT Prepare to Care Guide, is some cultural sensitivity to the fact that for many older LGBT adults, this is actually the second time they've been inserted into a caregiving role if they're caring for a partner or a spouse. In the 80s, with the AIDS epidemic, many LGBT folks, primarily gay men, were pushed into caregiver roles without any kinds of resources. They were in their 20s, 30s. They had no concept of what that meant. There weren't a lot of resources for even fighting the virus, let alone, thinking about how you care for your sort of family of choice, your loved ones that you've surrounded yourself with. So there's some kind of post-traumatic stress that comes with re-entering as a caregiver in your later years when you kind of went through something pretty traumatic without much support. So those are the kinds of nuances that we're talking about when it comes to the LGBT community. The other thing I would mention is this age-friendly Pride guide is what I like to call it. You can see it on the screen there. But this was a joint effort between AARP and Sage and many of our other partners to really help the organizers of Pride festivals and parades to understand how they could better design those experiences so that they're more age-friendly. So that includes just tons of practical tips about how you can involve all ages in those celebrations. It is catered to more of the in-person experience, so it might not be as relevant this year as it will again next year, hopefully. But it's just tips like, if you're going to have a Pride parade, consider putting the LGBT elders towards the front of that parade as a sign of respect. Consider having a bus that accompanies them, so if they get tired of walking after a mile, they can get on the bus. It's a lot of very practical tips for how we can be more sensitive and inclusive of people of all ages and abilities when it comes to our Pride celebrations.
Absolutely. So, and if people are looking to download it, there was a website on the Caregivers Guide, and we can definitely repost that. So it's Prepare to Care. So if you're looking for that, that would be great. So Beau, before we move on, we have another question from Arlene. So great to hear AARP is serving the LGBT community. What types of volunteer opportunities are there to support this group? And I do know with COVID, our volunteer program looks a little different now, but if you have any feedback on that.
Yeah, thank you, Arlene. Great question. I mentioned that Rocket Man screening that we did across all the states and 78 communities as part of the sort of post-event survey, asking people how they enjoyed that experience. We also asked folks if they were interested in learning more about volunteering, and we had 672
Wow.
people say yes. So that's a great sign. We know that people are eager to help and work in this space. As you mentioned, Amber, in our traditional
Hmm.
days, there are opportunities for volunteers to help if we have a presence at a Pride
Correct.
festival. There's often, a booth or a table there. Many of our folks will march in parades, which I always think is pretty fun.
Hmm.
Um, but I would say in this virtual space, we still are working on things like delivering presentations and what that might look like, and each state is a little bit different. And so one of the things I always recommend is, if you are a current AARP volunteer, connect with your state colleagues and see if there are any opportunities, or frankly, if you have some ideas. We always love
Hmm.
to hear your ideas, because that's going to help us be much more relevant than us just Amber and I sitting here thinking up
Hmm.
ideas.
Yeah.
So there are some of those. The other thing that might be of interest is AARP did launch a community connections
Hmm.
online platform earlier this year after COVID really took off. And part of that program includes what we call a Friendly Voices program. And so that means that folks can actually call into that. You can see the website there. It's arpcommunityconnections.org. Folks can actually go to that site, or they can call into the toll-free number associated with that, and they can connect with someone who's just there to talk and listen. And I think for a lot of our LGBT elders who might be socially isolated right now, that's a great resource for them.
Hmm.
But then also that we do, we had a number of volunteers express interest in being the folks who make those phone calls or return
Hmm.
phone calls, to the point that I think we had to not take any more for a
Correct.
while while we were getting
Hmm.
everyone trained. But I would say, especially if you have any kind of experience in the LGBT community, having your experience as potentially one of those folks who would help answer those phones could be really helpful for us as well.
Absolutely. And so we know that June, of course, is Pride Month. So many folks do know that. So is AARP doing anything to celebrate Pride Month this year?
Yes, so I know we talked about it a little bit, but it is we are in strange times, as we know, in this virtual space. And one of the things that I just wanted to start with is actually the origin story of Pride. I'm not sure how many folks know, why we celebrate Pride or how it came to be, but we got to talk about this a lot last year, because the anniversary of the Stonewall
Hmm.
uprising, which happened in New York City, happened 50 years ago last year. So we actually celebrated the 50th anniversary of that. And basically, what was happening was LGBT folks who, at the time, 50 years ago, weren't allowed to congregate in bars and things like that. And so bars would be raided frequently. And at some point, the LGBT community just stood up and said, we've had it. We're kind of done with
Hmm.
this. And that was really the birth of the Pride movement. Today, you see festivals of 600, 700,000 people, and they're very family friendly. There's just, we've come a long way in the last 50 years. So one of the things I wanted to highlight is I mentioned those movies for grown-up screenings.
Correct.
We have converted those to virtual for now. So tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock Central Time, we're doing a free screening of The Normal Heart. This was an HBO movie. Some of you may have seen it already, but you can see the link there if this is something you're interested in. It's free. You do have to pre-register for this one, and then you'll get the link to be able to view it. So if you're interested in that, we have that movie tomorrow evening. We also are a supporter. AARP is a supporter and a contributor to the Global Pride Festival this year. This is going to be really interesting. It's a
Hmm.
24-hour virtual Pride celebration that
Wow.
starts late tomorrow evening and goes for 24 hours through Saturday. And that website there is globalpride2020.org. I don't think I'm probably going to sit at my computer for 24 hours and watch it, but I think I'll log in now and then to see what's going on, because they have got a great lineup of entertainers, speakers, musicians, and it's completely free. And our hope is, I know our AARP, our national events team, which traditionally shows up at a major Pride festival, decided instead to support this virtual festival this year. So we know that there'll be some representation for older LGBT adults as part of that Pride festival as well.
Beautiful. So there's still some things to do this weekend, even though
Yes.
Pride Fest is only a month. To me, Pride Fest and the LGBT community in general should be celebrated daily, not just 1 month. But I do love the fact that AARP is highlighting this. So you kind of mentioned the SAGE group before, but does AARP work with any local or national organizations to better serve the LGBT community?
Yes. So Sage has been a primary partner for us. And again, Sage is the services and advocacy for LGBT elders. They're really a great organization in the aging adult LGBT space. And so we've
Right.
worked with them for a number of years on a number of campaigns like Sage Table that I
Okay.
mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
We've actually worked with them to provide some training for some of our staff and volunteers as well. So they've been a great partner for us, and they have local affiliates. So a lot of our state offices partner with them. On the national level, we have a number of partners as well. Everyone from Lambda Legal, the Victory Fund Institute, Centers for Black Equity, the National Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce. There's a
Mm-hmm.
number of those partners. But one of the partners that I am really excited about that AARP has had a history of working with, but last year we had a real opportunity to do that in celebration of Stonewall, is StoryCorps. And some of you may know StoryCorps. They're the largest collection of human voices in the world, and their stories are archived in the Library of Congress.
Oh, okay.
And you'll often hear them on public radio. They'll do little snippets from StoryCorps stories. But last year, we got to work with StoryCorps on a project called Stonewall Out Loud to help celebrate the 50th anniversary of Stonewall. And part of that included putting together a listening toolkit so
Okay.
that people could actually capture stories themselves or from loved ones or friends that could be added to this archive. And so one of the things that we did was we worked with StoryCorps to identify some of those stories, and one in particular was one related to gay grandparents. And
Mm-hmm.
we had some research that showed that 88% of the grandparents that we surveyed said that they would support their grandchild if their grandchild came out as LGBT. And so we thought, well, let's tell a story. Let's share a story about if the tables were turned, and
Mm-hmm.
we had a young person who was interviewing her lesbian grandmother. So I'd love it if we can to share
Mm-hmm.
just a quick video that kind of
Absolutely.
tells that story.
Great.
How has your life been different than what you thought it was going to be?
I thought that my life was probably not one that was going to be worth living. There was this hole that I had all of my life because I never thought I'd be able to walk along the beach and hold somebody's hand because I'm gay. But, when I fell in love with my mommy, I knew that she was my soulmate. Do you know what I mean by that?
Yeah.
I'd never felt that way about anyone before. And after she had gotten her divorce from Grandpa Jim, she was very upfront with your mom. She told your mom she was in love and it was with a woman. And that was the first time that anyone was proud to say that they loved me. That made me the happiest I'd ever been in my life. And then when I got to know your mom and Uncle Justin, I knew that I had hit paradise because I now have a family that I can wrap my arms around.
Is there anything that you've never told me that you want to tell me now?
You and I talk about most things, but this is the first time that we've ever talked about the fact that I'm gay. And I guess what I want to ask you is, does it embarrass you to have a gay grandma?
No,
No.
it doesn't really matter
It
because
doesn't.
it just matters my relationship with you.
I always tell you how much I love you, but I don't know that you can really understand the depth of it because you're someone that I never thought would be in my life, and I can't imagine my life without you. You have always been a child that makes up her own mind, and I am so, so proud of you.
Well, you're one of my favorite grandmas. You do like a lot of things with me, like ride roller coasters and play poker. I don't know what life would be like without you here.
I love you, sweetheart.
Love you too.
Wow. I have to say, and I'm not a crier, for the folks who really know me, it was beautiful and heartfelt, and I do wish more people felt that way.
Yeah, that I
Yeah.
love that story just because it's a great, as I was mentioning at the very beginning of this, one of the things that we try to do is just amplify the
Mhm.
stories of older LGBT adults. And I think this is a beautiful story that just demonstrates that, when it comes down to it, we're all humans and we all,
Absolutely.
want the same things. So
Yeah, and so I know we're coming up on our time, and what you have shared with us, what you have talked about, has changed me, and I'm very excited that AARP thinks about everybody the same, and it doesn't matter what month it is that the LGBT community is on the forefront. So if folks are watching right now or are watching the replay, where can they find some additional resources for the LGBT community?
Yes. So I think, to reiterate what you've said, like we are an ally, we are an organization there for the older LGBT community and their families. And so I would encourage folks to visit our website, aarp.org/pride. So that should be pretty easy to remember. It's aarp.org/pride. And you'll see tons of additional information about some of the things we talked about today, links to those resources that we talked about. We just recently had a teletown hall last weekend that is archived and available there, and you'll also have the chance to watch some other videos. So if you want to kind of do some of those, the other thing I just wanted to mention is if I assume everyone on this audience is an internet user, but we do also have a special line at our member call center for LGBT older adults, and that toll-free number is 866 Pride 50. So that's 866-774-3350. And please feel free to share this website or that phone number with any older LGBT adults that you might be in contact with.
Great. And there is the phone number that Beau just mentioned, and that is specifically correct, Beau, for the LGBT community.
That's correct.
Okay, perfect. So once again, Beau, this was beautiful, and I'm so glad that we got to meet, because I know you're in another state, and even though we work for AARP, it's sometimes difficult to meet everybody, but it's been an honor to meet you, and it's been just really great interviewing you, and I want to thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you guys. Thank you, audience, for joining us today. This will be able to be shared, so please share this on your Facebook page if you think of any friends or family that would be interested in this content. Otherwise, join us next Thursday for another episode of Thursdays with AARP Wisconsin. Thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you, Beau.
Thanks for the opportunity.